One has to understand that attention per se is critical for development in every way. So when your child's attention is a problem, you can understand that this may play a role in any of a child's developmental fora. But there are a few areas that really are affected by the child's inability to focus, to concentrate, and not be distractible. The main focus for me has to do with language development. Children with ADHD generally, but not always, have major deficits in language which are really not spotted until much later in their educational careers. But it really starts already in babyhood. My general saying when I teach students about ADHD is that they're early walkers, late talkers. And that is sometimes the first sign of a problem. An ADHD child who does not speak in time, or is delayed speech, or has very simple speech at a time. So people are not particularly concerned about their language. They certainly are speaking, but the quality of their language is really poor. And mostly that is because they just don't listen. All children learn language by listening to people speak around them, listening to the way people interact and the way that they use phrases, use language, and use words. ADHD children, in fact, don't do that very well. And they are very interesting because they seem to know the big words well and will understand the concept of grandmother or breakfast, but will not understand the concept of that, this, or now. Short words do not fascinate children with ADHD, and they seem to focus on the big words, so that they often miss the gist of what you're saying to them. For example, play outside and don't play outside sounds exactly the same to a child with ADHD because they do not attend to the word don't unless you emphasize the word don't. If you just say it in normal language, they would ignore that word. And therefore, there's this miscommunication that happens between parents and children with ADHD all the time. The second problem is they get really confused when you use too many words. We have a tendency in South Africa especially to use a lot of words to soften the blow. So we try not to hurt the child's feelings by using a lot of words, like saying, you know, Peter, my poppet, my darling, go out and close the door, and I'll be really happy when you do that because you'll be my big boy and you're my hero and I will be nice and warm. And by then, he's out the door and he will have forgotten to close it because that was not really emphasized in the major lot of words we are using. So ADHD children don't get it. ADHD children need few words and very specific instructions. It would be like, Peter, close the door. Thank you. And the thank you is optional. So they need to really hear what you want them to hear, and you mustn't embellish it with too many words. Men are like that in general, so you have to stick to the basics. One of the other reasons is that children with ADHD, besides only focusing on the big words, not listening to the small words, and not listening to many words, in fact, they just shut off when you talk too much, they don't understand the emotional content of language. So for them, it would be very much the same to say, sit still and sit still would be exactly the same. They don't hear that difference. So if you don't say to them, you are making me angry, you must sit still, they don't know that they're actually making you angry because they cannot read prosody, that is that sort of emotional content of language. They certainly can't read body language. They cannot read that you are irritating them when you start looking at the ceiling, folding your arms. They don't get it. They'll be in your face. And because of this problem, where they do not read social cues and they do not read body language, they are very, very unsuccessful socially, and their peers don't like them. They seem to be friendly children, they're chatty, everybody likes them for the first half hour, then you can't get rid of them, and then they start irritating you and you can't get rid of them either. Then they don't get the clues, and eventually children are nasty to them. And so I just call them unsuccessful extroverts. So the attention is a major issue in language, in all aspects of language: pragmatic language, expressive language, receptive language. These children, of course, later on babble. They are real chatterboxes. They talk a great deal, but they say very little. And you sometimes want to say to them, get to the point. What is this about? Sometimes they will get so lost in what they have to say that they will stop, stare around, and not have an idea how to continue with the conversation, and sometimes will then embark on another conversation altogether without finishing the first one. These have all got profound implications for learning in school, because language is the basis where everything happens. And many of these children then will need extra help, especially with reading. Talking about reading, another problem that they have is comprehension tests. When you have attention deficit disorder, you can't do things that are boring. But schoolwork is generally boring. And then, if you have to repeat it, it's excruciating. So no child with ADHD likes to repeat things that are particularly boring. I think that's probably true for most of us. But the issue is that comprehension tests are the nightmare. They have to read through the work, which they don't want to anyway. Then secondly, they have to read through it again to find the answers, which they're not going to do. And thirdly, they will just guess the answers. So mostly they do very badly in school in comprehension tests. There certainly are good readers among ADHD students. There are some excellent readers, but the majority do not like reading. It takes too much attention, it's laborious, and it's boring. And they don't like to spend a lot of time with that. They may have other learning problems, such as battling with days of the week, any sequential things like seasons, months, because again, all of these things are pretty boring, and to have to repeat things to learn them is very uninteresting. Another problem is learning bonds. Don't want to spend a lot of time doing bonds. So the basic math could be a problem, not because they don't do or can't do math, just because they're not interested in learning things that are boring or repetitive. Lastly, many of these children have an element of dyspraxia, and so that means they are clumsy, they have poor fine motor coordination skills, and that leads to poor handwriting. Again, the problem is because they are bored in class, they want to do the work as quickly as they can, so they rush through it at some speed, and in the end, they have scribbled work that is full of mistakes, full of comments, full of lines, full of repetitions, for which they don't get many marks. Lastly, they're not very organized. And because they're not organized, they never hand their work in on time, they lose a lot of marks at school because assignments are not in time, they leave their homework at home, or they leave their homework books at school, they don't write down the homework, and they're forever disorganized. This is not a direct learning disability, but can cause major problems in a school. And these children need to be taught how to be organized, and they really need a lot of care, attention, and motivation, as well as monitoring to get them to get everything to and from school and do all their work. One of the things one could do that seems to work well in some families is having a launching pad. A launching pad is just a crate that stands somewhere in the house, and everything you find in the house that belongs to school, you throw in there. As the day goes on, and the next morning you pack all of that stuff in a suitcase and send them off, and hopefully most of the things are at school. Because to look for things the next morning is a nightmare before they go off to school. So attention deficit seems simple, but it can affect a child's life in many, many ways and cause them to have an element of school failure which may not be obviously linked to the attention deficit in the first place.